Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Welcome to this webinar on synodality in Oceania. Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Tēnei te mihi nui o ngā tangata o Aotearoa. Te tangata tuatahi o ene motu. Te motu o moana nui o Kiwa. Greetings to the First Nations people of Aotearoa, New Zealand, First Nations in these islands of Aotearoa in the Pacific Ocean. My name is Christina Raymer, and we welcome all of you to this webinar on Oceania, on synodality in Oceania. I'm from Hamilton in Aotearoa, New Zealand, and I'm a member of ACCCR, the Australasian Coalition for Catholic Church Reform. And it's our privilege to host this webinar in response to the call of Pope Francis to all of us globally to embark on this journey to become a synodal church. Similar webinars are being held in the other 6 continents of the world at various times throughout this month. Each considering this overarching question of what it means to become a synodal church in our region, or in their own region. To assist us in this task, we're delighted to be able to bring to you the extraordinary panel of speakers. 4 people we have, 1 from each of the 4 bishops' conferences of the Oceanic Federation. We've got Kelly Paget from the Diocese of Broken Bay in Australia, and Kelly's also an official delegate on the Synod on Synodality, and so she'll be going to Rome next month. We have Father Victor Roche from Papua New Guinea, who's their National Director for Pontifical Mission Societies. Thirdly, we have Manuel Beazley, who's Vicar for Māori in the Diocese of Auckland, Aotearoa, New Zealand, and he's also an official delegate to Synod on Synodality. And lastly, we have Dr. Susan Sela from the University of South Pacific in Fiji. Each of these speakers will have about 10 to 15 minutes to outline for us what it means to become a synodal church in their region, in their Federation of Bishops' Conferences. And then we will open it up for about 20 minutes of Q&A. And then we'll ask Dr. Alyssa Roper, also of Australia, a theologian on ecclesiology and synodality, to draw together the threads of the conversation this evening. But before we begin tonight, some housekeeping matters. This event is being recorded, and a link will be sent to all who are registered in the next week. This will come from our partner Garratt Publishing, and it's our privilege to have Garratt Publishing hosting this event for us. Thank you. Please feel free to share this link to the video widely with the people that you may know. We expect the event will run for no longer than an hour and a half, so we hope you have your coffee, your tea, your beverage, or your beverage of choice handy. I've got some water. And I said we'll have allowed some time for questions. If you have any questions or comments for the panelists, we've enabled the Q&A function. So please use the Q&A pop-up window to add any questions that you may have from tonight's discussion. Be assured that the panelists will see your questions. We'll do our very best to answer your questions. We have over 1,300 registrants to tonight's event from around Oceania, and also from other parts of the world, those who are interested in what's happening in our part of the world. But if we don't get to your questions, please forgive us. It's not because it's not important, but because just the volume of work we have and the time limitations. So let's begin with a karakia, a prayer. We acknowledge the Holy Spirit is the one who calls us together as the people of God, who calls us to embark on this journey, to embrace the synodal journey. So let us pray. We stand before you, Holy Spirit, as we gather in your name, with you alone to guide us, to make yourself at home in our hearts. Open our hearts, open our minds to listen to one another and to hear your voice, and the voice of the marginalised, the poor, and those living in the far-flung corners of our region of Oceania. May we embrace the diversity of peoples in our region and globally, as we enlarge the space of our tent, spread our tent cloths unsparingly, lengthen our ropes, and make firm our pegs, understanding that unity does not mean uniformity and that your love knows no bounds. We ask this of you who are at work in every place and time in communion with the Creator and the Christ forever. Amen. So now I want to turn to our first speaker, Kelly Paget. Kelly has been engaged in ministry throughout her working career, particularly in the areas of Catholic education and youth ministry in the Diocese of Broken Bay in Australia. Kelly has also, she's also a noteworthy she's held noteworthy positions throughout her vacation, including serving on committees, organising 2 Australian Catholic Youth Festivals and the Australian Plenary Council, which was kind of a forerunner of the Synod on Synodality, which we're going through now. In 2023, Kelly was amongst the five Australians chosen personally by the Holy Father to participate as the non-bishop members of the official synod. Kelly is a proud and devoted wife and mother, and consistently draws on her family life experiences to encompass her ministry to the people of God in the Diocese of Broken Bay and further afield. So we're keen to hear your voice, and it's a voice that has not been heard in synods in the past. So it's wonderful to have you on this panel, and welcome. Over to you.
Thank you so much for having me here. It's a real privilege to be part of this. And firstly, may I begin by saying Yama, which is the traditional greeting of the Indigenous peoples of the land in which I reside, in the Darkinjung peoples. In this lovely spring evening here on the central coast of New South Wales. So I am going to speak to you a little bit about, I thought I would give a bit of an introduction for those who may not know. Very aware that many who've been participating in these webinars would be very familiar with what is occurring and the rhetoric, I suppose, of the Synod, but I thought I'd just give you a little bit of a rundown just as we begin, in particular about where I fit in this, as well as my other Synod siblings who will be speaking with you this evening. So the Synod for this particular Synod is made up of 363 voting members, and 96 of them being non-bishop members. Now, you would know for the first time that Pope Francis asked for these non-bishop members to be part of the Synod here, and he asked for the 70 from each of the continental regions, 10 from each continental region to be part of this, and 35 of them to be women. So my encounter with the Synod, firstly, was one, I was quite overwhelmed, and I just wanted to point that out, that it was an incredibly intense experience for me, and one that was very overwhelming walking into that room with so many men, the hierarchy of our church. And I felt, to be honest, a little small walking into that room. And so I had to learn to raise my voice when necessary, and to have confidence in that voice. But as I said, I was one of those members, and I drew confidence in some of the hierarchy that were around me, who shared with me that I was equal with them at the table, which was heartwarming to hear. I did also want to share with you, because it shows our beautiful Synod siblings as well, and this is our Oceanic group that were all members of the Synod, and will all start flying into Rome late next week as we begin the Synod again in the Second Assembly. The Oceanic group became quite a well-known group, because I think in some ways not many people around the world knew about our Oceanic contingent, or understood the breadth and depth of our region, and how much water we cover as well. And so people were loving hearing the conversations and knowing more about us. They would often joke about everywhere they turned, they'd see another Aussie. So I feel like we were slightly overrepresented in some ways. But it was a great joy to be with my Oceanic Synod siblings during this time. What does this look like specifically in Australia? And then I will move to the Broken Bay component of that as well. And I do want to acknowledge, in talking about the Australian context, that we have a history that has flavoured how we are encountering and how we are engaging in this synod. And it brings its gifts and it brings its challenges as well. So I wanted to start by highlighting those, once again, which some of you will be very aware of. The first thing would be to note that we had our plenary councillor synodal journey that was announced in 2018. And that 4-year journey of listening and discernment that was using a synodal methodology, that was drawing all of us to be co-responsible, all of those who are baptised to come forward and to participate, was a clearly synodal process. I don't think we used that word enough probably at the beginning in articulating exactly what it was. It certainly was there in the theology of it, but synodality in some way shouldn't be a new term for us in Australia because of that. Now, and if it seems to be new to you, just a reminder of the breadth of that consultation here in Australia. We had well over 200,000 people participate in that consultation. Over 17,000 submissions were made. And so it was a quite depth and broad consultation of the people of God in Australia. Now, at the same time that was happening, and the joy and the challenges that came from that process, we also had the release of this document, The Light of the Southern Cross. Now, this document, which is a review of governance structures in diocesan settings as well as in parishes, which was released by our Australian Catholic Bishops' Conference and Australian Catholic Religious Australia, it was a direct response to a recommendation from the Royal Commission into Institutional Responses of Child Sexual Abuse. So this document, where it was providing very contemporary, progressive and synodal methodology for our governance structures in our church, came from a moment of crisis. And so the first thing I would say is that many of the ways that we are encountering synodality here in Australia has actually been flavoured by a foundation of a crisis moment for our church, where we had to really stand and be vulnerable and take account to the wrongdoings that we have done in the past, and realise just how deep and painful those wrongdoings were. So with those two parts of the context that led up to the announcement of the Synod in 2021, the challenges that then really came to the forefront was that Australians in some ways were a little bit exhausted by or fatigued by consultation. And so there was a concern for some that going back out with another question would actually turn people off. And in some ways, I think it may have turned some people off when they were thinking that we've already spoken, why are we speaking again? Like, why isn't it now time for action? That also then had some suspicion that was underpinning it. And there was fears that were certainly starting to be articulated more clearly. And the fears came from two camps. There was the fears of those who feared that everything was going to change and the traditions were going to change. And there was the fear of those who thought, we've already been talking so much, nothing is going to change. And so there certainly was a grounding of fear that was being articulated. But I would also say that there were some real gifts that came from our Australian context that led into our encounter into this synod journey that we're currently on. And that is one that we actually had this real unique understanding of synodality. As a synod member, when I walked into the synod hall, the space that had been set up, the round tables, and how they were going to facilitate those conversations of the Spirit was very, very familiar to me. It looked like the plenary council hall. And so there was some, that gave me comfort, where others were a little bit nervous about the setup. I knew exactly how that was going to work. That understanding and awareness of the methodology of conversation with the Spirit is already quite prevalent then within our communities. And we also have then a number of experts within our Australian context that are actually helping to aid the international field, but also to drive what we're doing here. So with that, I just wanted to finish off by talking a little bit about what's happening in our Australian, in the Broken Bay context. And that is, we are doing some unique things, and things, once again, that have predated the call for the Synod for Synodality. One of them I wanted to touch base on is our regional and deanery-based consultations, the pastoral discernment. That's been facilitated by the wonderful Paddy Beattie, who has been working in each of our deaneries with a synodal methodology to draw out what the gifts and the challenges of each of those regions are, and then to put together a report that is paralleled by socioeconomic data, and to put forward initiatives that each of those regions can then take forward. We've also had consistent formation in our local environment, particularly since the first assembly. I've been blessed that Broken Bay I attended as a member of the Synod, but Bishop Anthony Randazzo was also in attendance. So that's quite unique to have two people from one diocese attending. And so we came then because it's good to have friends on the journey to implement some of these things back home. So things like having a real focus on synodality at a clergy conference, inviting local and international speakers, having real consistent verbal and written communication to underline the theology of synodality, so it becomes far more familiar and aware with our peoples. Bishop Anthony's even talking about it in his homilies. And lastly, I just wanted to also raise two really important practices that have been developed. One is in a parish setting, and that is the parish in council that Father David Branson has developed with his local leadership team, which is a really unique way of transforming a parish council to be actually the involvement of the entire parish community that gathers in assembly several times a year to talk about what the needs and initiatives that they want to take forward strategically. And lastly, how Bishop Anthony has transformed some of his governance structures in the diocese, in particular the Council of Deans and what was the heads of mission. He has now merged those two together to become the Council for Pastoral Mission, where we have lay people and ordained clergy working together to build the pastoral strategy for the diocese. The last thing I just wanted to highlight to you is what I bring to the Synod and this walking together, and what I really made me understand the importance that this is actually about relationships, bringing people together to listen, to talk, and to hear where they're coming from, to hear their giftedness and their unique unique giftedness is given by God. And where I saw that so beautifully, and I think it's a really lovely way, is my beautiful encounter that I had with the Holy Father. And it's actually Emmanuel's arm in front of me there. But I had the absolutely incredible opportunity to sit with the Holy Father and talk to him about the fact that I am a wife, that I deeply love my husband, Chris, that I have 3 children, that I've left at home for a month to be here in this important journey. And Pope Francis listened to me. He asked me their names. He asked me how old they were. And he told me that he was going to pray for us. He also played a bit of a joke on me, as you can tell on these photos here. But really, synodality was summed up in these photos. It was about us meeting and having relationships with each other. And that is what synodality should be. It is meeting where we are and having a relationship. And then with that relationship, we can talk about the topics at hand, taking the heat out of it and not arguing with each other. So thank you. That's what I wanted to share with you, and I'll hand it back to you now.
So thank you. Powerful words there, Kelly. That's wonderful. Just the structural things that you've talked about, process, but also the more effective things about relationship and what it means for us. So I'm going to ask now Father Victor Roche to speak to us. And Father Victor represents the Diocese of 20 dioceses of Papua New Guinea and 3 dioceses of Solomon Islands, which is one conference of bishops. So Father Victor, welcome. Father Victor is from the Divine Word Missionary. He's served in Papua New Guinea for the last 43 years, and most recently as General Secretary for the Catholic Bishops' Conference of Papua New Guinea and Solomon Islands, and for the last 8 years as the National Director of Pontifical Missions Societies in Papua New Guinea and Solomon Islands. And he was a coordinator for the synodal process of PNG and Solomon Islands and attended the Federation Conference of Bishops of Oceania meetings on synodality in Melbourne and in Fiji in 2023. So you have a lot of experience in that part of the world, in a very important part of the world in terms of Oceania, and perhaps a somewhat marginalised part of the world as well, certainly isolated. But it's a voice we want to hear, and you have also been very much part of the synodal process. So we welcome you, Father Victor, and keen to hear what you have to say. Over to you.
Thank you, Christina. I'm very privileged to join you all. I hope I join you. By the way, the headband I wear is from Manus province of Papua New Guinea, and this is worn by everybody, men, women, girls, boys, while singing and dancing. So this is a synodal expression and a symbol here. And if I may share my screen, what does becoming a synodal church mean for PNG and Solomon Islands? So I'm privileged to share with you the insights from the people and the think tank from PNGSI. When I say PNGSI, it's Papua New Guinea and Solomon Islands. From the synodal process, which took also my own reflections as a parish priest, as a pastor, and one who was involved in the coordinating the synodal process in Papua New Guinea and Solomon Islands. Yes, I want to give a brief background about Papua New Guinea. The population, according to the estimated in 24, is 13.62 million. There are 600 islands, 750 languages, and the capital is Port Moresby. And the main languages spoken here are English, Pidgin, Hiri Motu. And the churches, according to the 2011 census, 96% are Christians. Roman Catholics are 25.6%, the largest, and the Evangelical Lutherans, the next one, 18.4%, and the Seventh-day Adventists, 12.9%. They've increased greatly now in the last 40 years. Pentecostals, 10.4%, and there are 1,320 small sects. Among the Catholics are 25.6%. There are 3.5 million in Papua New Guinea. And there are 19 dioceses. Archdioceses are Port Moresby, Rabaul, Mount Hagen, and Madang. The Apostolic Nunciature is in Port Moresby. At present, we have an acting Apostolic Nuncio. And Cardinal John Ribat is our Cardinal for Papua New Guinea. The background for Solomon Islands. Population is 707,800 people. Capital is Honiara, and the language is English and Melanesian Pidgin. Thank you. Then the churches in Solomon Islands, the Church of Melanesia is the Anglican Church, is 32.2%, and Roman Catholics are 20%. And South Sea Evangelical Church 17.5%, and many more other churches. Catholics are 20%, and they number 141,000, and that there are 3 dioceses, Honiara, Auki, and Gizo. Archdiocese is Honiara. Thank you. And Synod and Synodality in Rome, which took place in October 2023, last year. 2 representatives were there from Papua New Guinea and Solomon Islands, Bishop Darius Kaluza of Bougainville Diocese, and Mrs. Grace Rakia, a female teacher from Goroka, and the leader of the Lasalians in Papua New Guinea. What does becoming a synodal church mean for Papua New Guinea and Solomon Islands? I have 6 points here. One is the church is our home. It is where we live our faith and where we belong. Through our common baptismal dignity, we belong to this home and we desire to protect it and care for it. The church in Papua New Guinea is a comparatively young church, 175 years old, progressing in the way of synodality where communion, participation, and mission are our lived experiences in the life of the local church. The next one is the poor and marginalized people. The plight of the poor and the marginalized people, disabled, elderly, street children, orphans, criminals, prostitutes, widows, divorcees, victims of abuses, victims of sorcery-related violence and Solomon Islands. So many times we lose them. They don't come to the church. We surely want to include them. Much work has been done to help these people, and there are still opportunities for more to be done. We have to extend our tent, as was the theme in the last synod, to welcome them all and to accommodate them. Laity in the church. Lay people are making remarkable contributions to the life and mission of the church in Papua New Guinea and Solomon Islands. They work along with the clergy and the religious men and women in faith formation activities and witnessing their faith in families and communities. Majority of the lay people are taking ownership of the church in pastoral ministry and governance. For example, during the crisis of Bougainville in Papua New Guinea, for almost 10 years, the families and the basic Christian communities kept the faith alive in the absence of effective clerical presence. This was a great example, not only in Papua New Guinea, and not only Bougainville, but also in the whole of Papua New Guinea. Number 4 is the role of women. Women play an important role in the church in Papua New Guinea and Solomon Islands. They are active. They fill the church. There is a positive change with regard to equality in participation in the work of the church. I want to share at this time on my experience. In 1982, I was a parish priest in Yanguru in the Vivek Diocese of Papua New Guinea. There, when I held the parish council, a woman stood up and wanted to speak. At that time, the chairman of the council, who was a man, he was a leader, and he said, "You sit up, you sit down, you are only a woman." And she sat down. And so women did not have much possible voices in the society at that time. But now, in that same parish, in 2024, last month I was there, she is the chairman of the parish council. There's a great change. So women in the traditional PNG society did not have much freedom to talk in public. It was the domain of men. The church has played an important role in the bringing up the women's voices and their leadership roles in the church and society. There will be greater role for women in the synodal church. The church is alive. Most of the churches are full in Papua New Guinea and Solomon Islands. I want to say most of the churches, though there are some churches that maybe youngsters are still absent. But I should say, last week I was there on a Sunday in the church in the town I am here. Both the masses were full. The liturgy is lively, singing and dancing, participating in the Eucharist, which Sunday liturgy lasts almost 2 hours with the singing and dancing. Homily is a dialogue, and though long, it is not boring. People are ready to sit down for a half an hour or 40 minutes for a Sunday homily. Youth and laity are active in the church and also in the liturgy. Number 6. Synodality is our lived experience. In the village life, dialogue is very common, especially now. Decision is reached after consensus. Church is a place where we journey together with communion and participation. We are putting synodality in practice Actually, I see after almost 43 years in Papua New Guinea, I see that synodality is put into practice in Papua New Guinea Church. And it is high time that the Universal Church took notice of such small countries like Papua New Guinea for their contribution, because it is a good example of lived synodality. And finally, conclusion. The Pope's visit to Papua New Guinea from 6th to the 9th September, which was 2 weeks ago, was a great experience not only for the Catholics, but for the whole country. I just met the CEO of a company just maybe 2 hours ago, and he said how good the presence of the Pope in Papua New Guinea made a good difference, not only for the Catholics, but for the whole country. The Synod on Synodality encourages the people, faithful, and also in decision making and governance. I feel that now the second synod is going to take place in a week's time, but it will be realized in the local churches only if those lived experience from the synod has to come to the people, ordinary people in the communities, in the villages, and in the dioceses. Now, we are very happy to live the synodality in Papua New Guinea and Solomon Islands because we feel we are the church, we are alive in Christ. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Father Victor. And good to talk to you. I had 5 years in Papua New Guinea as well. So you could have spoken in Pidgin and I'd have understood, but nobody else might have, or maybe a few others would have. But it's a joy to hear that the church is so alive and well in a country that is still very dear to me in my heart.
How many years were you in Papua New Guinea?
I had 5 years in New Ireland province. So
oh, great, great. Welcome again. Welcome again.
Am now. Okay. All right. Let's move on. I'm sure there will be questions that come to you in regard to your talk, but we will save those for the Q&A. I want to move on now to Manuel Beazley, who is our speaker from Aotearoa, New Zealand. Manuel is Vicar for Māori in the Diocese of Auckland, and he sits on the New Zealand Catholic Bishops' Conference Local Māori, an advisory group to the New Zealand Bishops' Conference. The role of Vicar Māori is a link between the bishop and the Māori community of the diocese. The previous two vicars of Māori, Pa Henry Tate and Pa Anthony Brown, are Manuel's uncles. So it's a family business, runs in a family. Manuel has had nearly 25 years of ministry experience in the diocese, and he served in youth ministry on numerous marae boards, school boards, and NGOs. He was named by Pope Francis as one of the non-bishop members for the Synod on Synodality in Rome. So he too, like Kelly, is one of the official delegates. The experience of the first session for Manuel, he says, was a rich personal experience and one that he's been actively sharing throughout Aotearoa, New Zealand. And so we look forward to hearing what you have to say about where we're going and what your perception is of what it means to become a synodal church for Aotearoa, New Zealand and beyond. Over to you, Manuel.
Tēnā koe, Christina, o tira tēnā koutou katoa e te hunga e hono mai nei, mā runga ipurangi, I noho tawhiti mai, noho tata mai, tēnā koutou katoa. So greetings to you in my native language, Māori, the indigenous language of Aotearoa, New Zealand. And it's lovely to be with you tonight. I don't have a PowerPoint, so that's why the pretty background in the back hopefully can grab your attention. The image is of a place in Aotearoa, New Zealand called Tōtara Point, and the plinth behind me marks the spot where the first Mass was celebrated on New Zealand soil with the arrival of Bishop Jean-Baptiste François Pompalier, a missionary priest and bishop from Lyon in France. And so that first Mass took place, was celebrated on the 13th of January in 1838. So much like the church in other parts of our region, we're a relatively young church, particularly compared to the church throughout the world. So it's lovely to be here with you tonight. And I have to admit that when I heard that the Pope was calling for a synod on synodality, I asked myself, what does synodality mean? And it turns out that I wasn't the only one. I had heard of synods before, but because it was mainly bishops who were involved, I didn't take too much notice. Since the beginning of our diocesan phase in 2021, I have been fully immersed in it. And then, as a delegate to the Assembly in Rome, I have truly been in the thick of it. An understanding of synodality is to be synhodos, on the road together. And since 2021, many parishes and individuals in my diocese and in our country, and perhaps and also all over the world, have been introduced or reintroduced to the call to be a synodal church. But after being on this road for 2 to 3 years now, how do we move from being on the road to advancing on the road, that we go forward? Synodality is not so much concerned about producing more documents, more structures, but more about being ever aware that this is the Lord's church and that we must have our gaze fixed on the Lord as we journey. About being attentive to the promptings of the Spirit, planting dreams, having a vision, allowing hope to flourish, inspiring trust, binding wounds, weaving relationships, awakening a new dawn, learning from one another, and finding ways that will enlighten our minds, stir our hearts, and give strength to our hands. A synodal church requires us to strive for maximum participation, reaching out to involve the greatest number of people possible, and especially those on the periphery who are often excluded and forgotten. This will maximize inclusion and participation and capture the true realities, the lived experience of the people of God. My role as Vicar for Māori in the Diocese of Auckland puts me in contact with many Māori people, the indigenous people of New Zealand, who have varying degrees of connection to the church. Those who are perhaps on the peripheries and beyond share with me their hurts, their frustrations, but also their great hopes for the church. The quality of our attention to one another will be crucial in this synodal pathway. How we listen can be more important than what we say. Careful listening helps us to understand the other person, to stand in their shoes. Listening is the first step, but it requires an open mind and heart, without prejudice. We can ask ourselves how well do we listen to those who have differing views? How do we include voices that can sometimes be ignored? Sometimes we can fall into the trap of structuralizing our synodality rather than making our structures more synodal. In New Zealand, each parish community is required to have a parish pastoral council. Each Catholic school has a board of trustees. Many other faith communities have governing or administrative bodies. Cultivating a spirituality of synodality within these bodies can help us to dialogue on some of the big issues facing our church. Dialogue is different from discussion, where there can be argument and animosity. When we dialogue, we leave behind prejudices and labeling. Dialoguing means that we are open to the views of the other in an atmosphere of acceptance, where it can lead to new insight if we are open to each other. In the Church in New Zealand, the feedback sent to the Secretariat for the Synod identified some of these topics as important for consideration. Women in the life of the Church's mission. Some points raised include the inclusive language in church liturgies, the role of women in leadership, a gender balance of men and women on parish and diocesan bodies, questions around ordination of women to holy orders. A note from our bishops on the topic spoke of the rank of cardinal not requiring ordination, and this might be a topic for consideration. The generosity of women to the life of the Church was keenly pointed out. However, a point was made of migrant priests coming into New Zealand, not fully appreciating the place of women in New Zealand society. It was not that long ago that the 4 highest ranking positions in our country were simultaneously held by women. Another topic that was raised was around the area of consecrated life and lay associations. Some feedback lamented the demise of lay associations, once prominent in New Zealand church and civic life. Some people are seeking forms of association which will nurture their spiritual growth and sense of connection. These are often described as being smaller communities within parishes which promote shared commitment and fellowship, care for one another, and spiritual growth. Another topic, deacons and priests in a synodal church. The leadership style of priests is seen as crucial in fostering synodality and co-responsibility. Some groups acknowledge that priests minister in a complex, multi-ethnic environment where a number of expressions of faith can conflict with one another. Selection processes and training for seminarians, induction processes for priests new to the diocese, appraisal-type processes for priests, parish priests, bishops were among other concerns. Another topic, the focus around the bishop in ecclesial communion. Our bishops express that there is no need to be afraid of synodality. Synodality does not mean the breaking down of the ordered nature of the church, but rather the heart of synodality is reciprocal listening, dialogue, community discernment, and the creation of consensus so that each member of Christ's body can play their part in a co-responsible way. Another area was about journeying towards a listening and accompanying church. There was strong support for the listening of the synodal process to be encouraged at all levels of parish life, allowing the people of God to be heard and to learn and to listen to one another. There was support for the ministry of listening and accompaniment that was outlined in the final synod report from the first session. Several groups, though, suggest that formation is necessary, both for listening at an individual level and within synodal processes, as well as those in listening as an ecclesial ministry. Others recognized that relationship and encounter are needed for listening, and that we might need to put ourselves in different spaces, going where people are in order to listen, and that formation would be needed to help people take that step. The diversity in the church has become more evident to many through the synodal process, and people have become more comfortable with diversity. Another area that was looked at was structures for participation. For some people, clericalism is potentially a problem for existing pastoral bodies becoming synodal bodies. Co-responsibility was also seen as being about belonging and inclusion. For example, co-responsibility has been mentioned a lot. And to feel responsible, you first need to feel like you belong and are included and that you matter. Jesus was relational. Our church needs to be relational as well. Formation opportunities are needed to nurture and form co-responsibility for both laity and clergy. We must be willing to unlearn in order to learn. One group, however, said increased lay participation and involvement at governance level may erode faith and limit vocations. Ultimately, governance responsibility rests with those in holy orders as part of their office, was their feedback. New Zealand has a diverse population. Māori are the indigenous people of this country, and there are more than 200 ethnicities in New Zealand. Integrating different cultural expressions into church practices and ensuring that the church's activities and teachings resonate with various cultures present in New Zealand is needed. We have not yet responded adequately to those whose participation is limited by disability or other abilities. For example, disability advocates are needed. Many people in our congregations have hidden disabilities that do not allow them to fully participate in the life of the church. The lack of young people in parish bodies was also a concern for many. So, what is synodality? It's a mindset. It's a culture change. It's a way of being together, once practiced in our church, brought forward for the third millennium. Perhaps it's also Vatican II's theological principles in practice. It's Pope Francis's sense of what our church needs now to continue to heal from her past, to renew trust, to more widely embrace the presence of the Holy Spirit to guide the church. Historically, the church has operated on a hierarchical model where decisions are made at the top and communicated downwards. Everyone from clergy to laity should have a voice. This means that the insights and experiences of all members of the church are valued and considered in all decision-making processes. Becoming a synodal church means moving towards a model of church life that is more participatory and culturally sensitive, responsive to the local needs and realities. It reflects a commitment to inclusivity and collaboration in building a vibrant and relevant church community. Reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Thank you.
Tēnā pai. Thank you very much, kia ora. Manuel. There's much that I could ask, particularly because I'm also from Aotearoa, New Zealand, and so hear much between the lines of what you were saying, but I'll leave that also to the Q&A, and we'll come back to that. So thank you again. Our last speaker is Dr. Susan Sela. Dr. Susan is from Fiji, and so she brings to us the Pacific perspective, the Pacific Island nations. There are 12 member state countries of the Pacific Islands: Tonga, Samoa, Fiji, Solomon Islands, or Solomon Islands is part of the Bishops' Conference with Papua New Guinea, Nauru, Kiribati, Niue, Marshall Islands, Cook Islands, Tokelau, Fiji, and Tuvalu. So currently, Susan works for the University of South Pacific as Director of Pacific Technical and Further Education. She takes that work to right throughout the Pacific. She belongs to the Immaculate Conception Parish, Laumi, a small town outside of Suva, where she works as one of the parish pastoral council leaders. In January 23, she was part of the discernment writing group that put together the Oceanic response to the continental document. And in February, she co-chaired a week-long Federation of Catholic Bishops' Conferences with Father Sela. In July 2023, she was invited by the Holy Father to be a non-bishop member of the official synod on synodality in Rome. And so we welcome you, Susan, to speak to us and to give us your perspective on what it means to be a synodal church in such an extraordinarily diverse environment as the Pacific Ocean. Kia ora.
Vinaka, Christine, and Bula Vinaka, everyone, and welcome to this session. I want to first thank Kelly and the earlier speakers for setting the stage, explaining synodality, how we came to be members, and what actually happened in Rome. I have a presentation, and I'd be glad if James could share it. Thank you. I know you may be wondering why I chose this particular photograph, and I have as my background the pinnacles of Nauru. This is the last country that I visited in my role as Director of Pacific TAFE, and also where I met with the parishioners of Christ the King Parish in Nauru after seeking approval from the newly ordained Bishop Simon Mani, who is the Bishop of Kiribati and Nauru. I asked him if I could share with the people in Nauru on the synod and synodality, and we also taught them spiritual conversation. This is why I have as my background the Nauru environment, some of the striking features of the Nauru environment. Being the only person having attended the Synod on Synodality in Rome in 2023 from this side of the Pacific, that is from Fiji, Tonga, Samoa, Vanuatu, Kiribati, Nauru, somehow I felt a huge responsibility, and I didn't know how to go about it. There was also Archbishop Paul Donahue in the Cook Islands, but there wasn't much communication after we returned from Rome. However, I was very grateful to my own Archbishop, Peter Loy Chong, here in Fiji, who immediately invited me to give a public lecture on the synod. And that was within a week of my return from Rome. So everything was still very fresh. The excitement was still very apparent. And I had a lot of pictures to show. And people could still sense the excitement in my voice as I spoke about the synod, my first trip ever to Rome, setting foot in St. Peter's Square, just describing everything to everyone there. But that kind of started off what I will now call my mission work. Because after that was in November of 2023. In December, nothing happened. And then January of 2024, that's when things began to happen for me. Invitations came from different groups for me to talk about the synod on synodality. So I began to refine my presentation, but also our Archbishop here, Archbishop Peter Loy Chong, he began to put together a team, our own synodality team. Can I move on to the next slide, please, James? And so this team, together with this team, I was able to cover quite a large number of groups. And when I traveled for work, I also used that opportunity to speak to parishioners about the synod synodality. And so in a way, I was taking this work, the message of synodality, to Oceania. And so these are some of the groups that we were able to plant or spread the word or nurture synodality in the various parishes and church groups. So the Catholic Women's League in Fiji, a very big group. The Sisters of Our Lady of Nazareth, I was invited to their extended council meeting. And that's where I also took them through the steps of spiritual conversation. The clergy, religious and laity, parish commissions, parish committees. So all of these groups were given a presentation on the synod that occurred in Rome, the whole process that was followed. And for many people, just listening to that, and then being shown the images, the pictures of those little circles or tables of 10 to 12 people seated, sharing, going through the steps of spiritual conversation. That was an eye-opening experience for many people. What I have is a series of photographs. I just want to share with you my own synodal journey across the Pacific and here in Fiji in the different contexts. So here is a photograph of the people, parishioners of Christ the King Parish of Nauru, participating in spiritual conversation. They thoroughly enjoyed it. They just wish that I could have stayed longer, but I was there for my own work as the director of Pacific TAFE, and they said, one of the women told me, okay, we will fundraise so that you can come back. But I could see, not just from Nauru, but from many of the sessions that we held, a certain thirst, a certain hunger for formation, for a strengthening of the faith. People welcomed it. Wherever I went, people welcomed listening to the presentation, and they enjoyed spiritual conversation. The next image is a very big Divine Mercy gathering here in Suva. So Archbishop Peter Lloyd Chong, I must say, he was quite strategic. He used any gathering of the church and got us to, myself and the team, to present on synodality and to teach spiritual conversation, so that even children, you can see children there involved in spiritual conversation. And the fruits of their conversation are really amazing. Children asking for a children's retreat. We want to have our own retreat. And it was such a refreshing experience to hear people speaking openly about what they wanted in order to build and strengthen their faith. So this was the Divine Mercy gathering in, this is the Don Bosco Hall here in Suva. So the next image is one of my own parish. I've spent quite a bit of time in my parish moving. So we moved a few steps ahead. This is a gathering of our parish leaders, where after they had experienced spiritual conversation, learning about the synod and what actually took place, we then took a step further to see how we can take the whole parish. Now, our aim is to take the whole parish into spiritual conversation over over some of the major issues that we're facing in the parish. So currently, I mean, at this time, right now in my parish, the different areas or the divisions of the parish are preparing for a parish-wide spiritual conversation in order to discern together, to listen to each other, encounter each other, listen to each other, and then discern and come up with actions based on the issues that we would like to take forward and address, and perhaps even come up with our parish strategic plan or pastoral plan for 2025 onwards. And in the next photograph, just not so long ago, maybe 2 weeks ago, 2 or 3 weeks ago, a huge gathering of women, the Fiji Catholic Women's League, the annual gathering took place in Nandi. Over 1,000 women gathered. And you can see there the women in spiritual conversation. They also had a mixture, and here again, our Archbishop working with a team of facilitators. So more women were trained, more people were trained, men and women, to help facilitate this huge gathering. And this is where women addressed the issues of drug abuse, of domestic violence, and other issues, using the tools of synodality, using the pastoral circle, using gospel sharing and spiritual conversation. And the fruits of all their discussions have been compiled, and as I'm sharing with you this evening, or earlier this evening, the team met again with our Archbishop, and the first draft of the Catholic Women's League strategic plan has been prepared based on the fruits of all of the conversations that took place. The wonderful thing about spiritual conversation is participation, the full participation of everyone, because everyone is listened to, everyone is given the opportunity to speak. And then we make space for the other by responding to them. And then as a group, we come together to work out, what is God trying to tell us in what we have shared as individuals, or in what we have, in how we have responded to each other. That is I think, the beauty and the power of spiritual conversation, this wonderful tool to be used, that we used in the Paul VI Auditorium in Rome, and that I've been teaching together with the team. We've been teaching all these groups that we've been meeting. And so people now speak of spiritual conversation as if it's something that they've been doing all the time. And it's such a wonderful thing to see and to know that the seeds of synodality are already sprouting. I'll have to say here too that for us in the Pacific, this thing about journeying together, doing things together, working together communally is not new. It is part and parcel of who we are, because we are communal people. However, we are also aware of the problems that are now fragmenting this communal lifestyle. Individualism or individualistic type of life is already very much a part of the lives of Pacific Islanders, and where we are not, where we people are just concerned about their everyday living, they're concerned about themselves. So it's about reawakening this this real concern for each other, this communal lifestyle that that will make one leave their comfort zone. You know, we have to get out of our comfort zone, and it's so nice to hear people talk about synodality in that way. Yeah, it's about me leaving my comfort zone and going out to visit. So and a lot of that has been happening. Here's the next picture is of St. Thomas Aquinas. This is St. Thomas Aquinas community, a little community in my parish on the outskirts of Lamitown, where I just had one session with them. I shared with them on synodality. They really enjoyed the session, and then taught them spiritual conversation. So here too, children were involved, children, parents, grandparents, everyone had felt, you know, that synodality had something for them, and that it was something that a way of life that's not going to be foreign at all to them, but that will strengthen their relationships. And they did mention that they needed to also get up out of their homes and go and visit those families in particular that weren't engaged in church activities, those who felt that they were not included in the church. So all of this came out during that session. I also had a session with, as I mentioned earlier, the Sisters of Our Lady of Nazareth. In this next slide, we have the Sisters of Our Lady of Nazareth, and you can see them there in spiritual conversation. I shared with them too, as I shared with all these different groups that I had the opportunity and the privilege of sharing with them on the synod, on synodality. I also shared with them some of the messages, those profound messages that I got from the meditations by Reverend Timothy Radcliffe. And I could see that these messages also had the same impact on the different groups that I shared with. And here the nuns, you know, later they came to tell me, one or two of them said, you know, just listening to you, you sound like a nun yourself. And I said, I suppose the longer I do this work, I might begin to think that I am one. But this was a great 2-day session that I had with the Sisters of Our Lady of Nazareth, and I was really grateful for that opportunity. And they said, you know, it did wonders. Spiritual conversation was embraced with both hands. They really enjoyed that, having their discussions in that way. And then I did go to Tonga for work, and while there, I met with the Cardinal, and we had a session, just about half an hour, where I told him all about the synod. And then later he wrote to our Archbishop and asked Archbishop Peter if Archbishop could come over with the team and run sessions with the clergy and church leaders there in Tonga. So that's the very next slide is that on the is the synod synodality sessions in Tonga. And there you have, we had a team go first. 2 of our team members went ahead to teach the facilitators how to facilitate spiritual conversation. This is an important part of ensuring that spiritual conversation is run properly, and so that deep discernment can take place, and that people can and will experience listening to the Holy Spirit and allowing the Holy Spirit to really work within the group during those sessions. And then my next slide is on taken from part of our report sent from to CPAC from our Archdiocese. Our Archbishop, I must say, hats off to Archbishop Peter Chong. He is a true synodal leader, and working co-responsibly with the laity and with his priests and with the people, and working ecumenically is very much a huge part of what he does. So he's taken synodality beyond Catholic settings to the Fiji Council of Churches, in the consultation on medicinal marijuana, the faith-based organization consultation. So it's all listed there. I'm very much aware of time here, so you can see, you can read for yourselves on all the things that on all the activities that our Archbishop has been involved in, the panel workshops on domestic violence, civil society organization workshops for church leaders on people-centered development. This was a side event at the very recent Pacific Islands forum meeting recently held in Tonga. And then with our young people, he has used their preparation for confirmation, particularly the day before, or on the morning of, the day before, when he has a session with them, where he provides them opportunities to share about their relationship with God. And this is taking the synodality process, to another level, where young people are able to talk about what God means to them, and then they were asked to create images of their relationship with God, and this is in groups, and then each group would then stand up and present to the rest. And in the evening, he had these theological reflection sessions, where young people were asked, what was their experience like, or how was the Holy Spirit speaking to them in their 2-day lead up to their confirmation, and just creating that awareness, which I think is a wonderful thing that he is doing with the young people. And this is, of course, working alongside those the faith formation teams who have been preparing these young people for confirmation. And then in our next slide, I have the joys of synodality and being involved in the process of spiritual conversation. Or many people expressed that it was great to know that they were heard. It was wonderful to have an opportunity to participate. And they see synodality as an opportunity to review some of the existing structures in the church, an opportunity to work co-responsibly, to be actively engaged. And there was this recognition amongst many of the groups that so much more can be achieved. So much more can be achieved in this road, in this journey that we are all on, which is our journey to the Father. But so much more can be done now that they know how to go about spiritual conversation. So they see it as a wonderful opportunity to address some of the increasing ills of society. The challenges are that we need more people in our team. Time, of course, is one. Prioritizing resources, monitoring, reaching out to those not engaged, how to reach out to them. All of this has to be, carefully thought out and before people engage in it. And then, of course, strengthening ecumenism in our parishes and communities. And clericalism. And this was one of the issues that came up too, not just clericalism, but lay clericalism as well. And then in my final slide, I just have moving forward as a synodal church in mission. It's important that you have an archbishop, a leader who believes, obeys, and leads by example, and one who works co-responsibly with his priests and the laity, all the different participatory church groups, etc. With the youth and children, the parents. We know that we have a lot of work ahead of us to prepare formation modules with accompanying resources for the purposes of formation. We need to teach and practice the tools of synodality, and above all, to embrace the important role of being a baptized Catholic on this journey. And I have on the left side of that slide, to be a listening church, we recognize that this is what synodality is, that we are a listening church. We recognize and acknowledge that synodality is a way of life that is really about journeying together to the Father in the footsteps of Jesus, animated by the Holy Spirit. And it's a lifelong journey. It's not something that ends after you finish the workshop. No, there's so much to be done. But for Oceania, yes, of course, the possibilities are very, very high and very positive about Oceania becoming a synodal church in mission. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Suzanne. Suzanne, I just have to say, wow, it's extraordinary to see in your talk and reflecting Pacific Islands and in hearing Victor on Solomon Islands and Papua New Guinea, how alive and well synodality is already happening in very many ways. The level of participation, the church being alive and people being actively involved, men and women, young and old, all sorts of people. A question that I see coming through, though, from all of the, something that all of it mentioned, is the status of women in the church. The primacy of baptism is being affirmed, but what do you hear from the people in your regions about the possibilities of women being recognised with full equality in leadership as well as in ministry in the church? And that includes the possibility of ordination of women. Could you answer that, please? Perhaps we'll go back to Kelly to answer that, and then we'll just give everyone a minute or two to talk about the status of women in the church.
Thanks, Christina. I think particularly in the region that I am in, Broken Bay, that is on the peripheries of Sydney Archdiocese, being a metropolitan diocese in particular, that is a polarising question. I would state that. There are certainly some who are very adamant about the necessity of it, and I would see equally so that from the emails that I'm getting from both sides at the moment, trying to advocate that there are those who are strongly opposed to it as well. It is interesting. It's not one of the topics that we'll actually formally discuss in this second assembly in terms of what the Instrumentum Laboris has laid out for us. In regards to ordination of women, but certainly the role of women will still be discussed. I don't think we'll be able to avoid it. In those ways, we've let the cat out of the bag there, thankfully, and we'll be able to talk about that in a continued, open and honest way. It's certainly, as I can say from my perspective, it's polarizing, that question. And I can only take my own experience and the voices that I am hearing from both those polar sides and try to allow then the Holy Spirit to work through that as I then talk at this next assembly.
Thank you. Who should we go to? Victor, do you want to continue as the second person then?
Yes, the role of women in Papua New Guinea and Solomon Islands has to improve greatly in the church and in the society. Surely it has to improve, though the church has done quite a bit in this field. The ordination of women is not an issue in Papua New Guinea. Nobody has raised it up. So I don't think it is an issue in Papua New Guinea.
But equality of women
Thank you.
in leadership is something
Pardon?
that's becoming, but women are becoming more involved in leadership and ministry in other ways, though. As you were
Oh,
saying.
yes. They are,
Yes.
oh, yes. They are becoming both in the society, in the government, and in the churches. In the Catholic Church, the more women play an important role in the leadership roles, especially in spiritual movements and also in the parish councils.
Are women involved as catechists? I know catechists are very important at the village level in Papua New Guinea. Are there women
Yes.
catechists?
Oh, there are more women catechists coming up,
Right.
more young women catechists, and they are also more, I should say, lay
So perhaps
volunteers.
women in leadership. Sorry, I didn't mean to talk over you.
Yes, go ahead.
I'm hearing that women in leadership and ministry is happening anyway, but in a different way, perhaps not formally in the traditional clerical forms of the hierarchical church of the past. So
Yeah. Yes.
maybe the spirit is working differently in a different way. That's just my
Yes.
observation.
Yes. Thank you.
Okay, Manuel, do you want to answer that question? You were also talking about the inclusion of women, inclusive language and participation, women in leadership, all sorts. Yeah.
Yeah. Look, I think one of the major obstacles for the church in the 21st century is the sense of hypocrisy within the church, in the sense that we speak about the equal dignity of baptism, and yet that equal dignity isn't materialized, if you like, in ways that really express that for women. That there are obstacles, there are barriers, there are, doors are shut to women in certain ways within the church. So to speak of the equal dignity of baptism, we've got to live that. We've got to really stress that in all levels of the church. This particular topic, when we spoke about this at the assembly in Rome, and Kelly and Susan will remember that, or may remember that I made an intervention on this topic at the synod in Rome. How it works is that you need to book in if you'd like to sort of respond to something that you've heard, and then you get your chance, and you only get a few minutes. But this particular topic I felt compelled to speak on, in the sense that for those of us who are gathered in Rome at the assembly, and Kelly gave you the stats for how many women were present. And one of my points that I made is that we are talking, particularly when we're speaking about women in the church, that's what we were doing. We were speaking about women rather than speaking with women. And so the fact that there was a huge mismatch in the representation of women in the assembly was, in my mind, a great shame, but also a huge obstacle in advancing this discussion. On the day that we had discussed this in the synod, in the synod hall, there was one woman seated at my table of, I think there were about 10 other men, and I felt quite uncomfortable about that we were having this conversation. This one woman sitting at our table had this conversation with 10 other men around her, and that was what I pointed out to the assembly, that that's an injustice, that's a travesty, that's a shame, and all those sort of hyperboles that you could probably apply to that. But it's something that really does need us, really to progress on, but also to take some pretty firm actions to address.
Thank you. Yes. And Susan, do you want to come back to that question?
Well, in all of the groups and all of the places that I went to, it didn't come up at all. Although I did mention that this was something discussed at the synod, and I think the priorities are different for us here, and so we all know, though, that many of the women in the church, they hold leadership roles, and in many parishes, women are the backbone of the parish, and they support the priest, they support the parish council, and even our seminary here, our diocesan priests here in Fiji. The Catholic Women's League plays an important role in funding training. So, but as far as ordination is concerned, that was never discussed, not really. And people felt, when I did bring it up, they felt that, no, one or two said, no, that's not our priority right now. There's so many other things that we really need to look into, so many other problems that our young people are facing, even adults are facing. Yeah, so it's been like that for us here, and even in Nauru, it wasn't something that came up at all.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yeah.
Despite the fact that you did mention things about the importance of baptism and the equality of us all in
Yes.
baptism, and so the principles are there, but how those are lived out perhaps vary from one region to another, and how they set their priorities. So yes, it's really interesting. I think it may be one of those examples of where we embrace the diversity, and what works in one region and what's important in one region is not necessarily how it is in another. It's no different, in my view, if I might make a comment, is voting. That over 125 years ago, we were the first country in the world, in Aotearoa, New Zealand, to give women the vote. And it all hinged around whether or not women were seen as human or not. Well, now you'd say, how could that be so absurd to think that women aren't human? But that's exactly the same question that we have in the Catholic Church. Are we baptized as children of God, as part of the church, or not, as equals? And we say at the Creed, we believe in one baptism. So I'll leave it there. And I don't believe the sky will fall in if we do allow greater diversity. And as we said in the prayer, that unity does not mean uniformity. So let's move on. Another key question that is coming through in my mind and through the Q&A is this question of how do we become a synodal church? It seems that some parishes and dioceses, and particularly in the Pacific, synodality is just the way you've always done things. You consult, you meet around the mat, you talk things through, and so on. Whereas I would have to say, in where my home here, Hamilton, Aotearoa, New Zealand, if I mention synodality to anyone after Mass, people say, oh, no, nothing's happening here. And I hear that in a lot of places. Nothing's happening. No, there's no talk of it. There's no awareness of it at all. And so there's a huge gap. And so the question is, how do we move to become a synodal church? What are the critical things that needs to happen that has made it happen where you are? Susan, you mentioned your bishop, Peter Choi, and is that the critical thing? What is it that's the critical aspect that allows a community to move to become a synodal community at the parish, diocesan and national level?
Yes, Christina, I believe that there has to be a concerted effort, a real effort to have a team, perhaps, that will go around, talking, creating awareness, promoting awareness, reawakening this it's not new. This is something that we all know we should be doing, and it's but it needs probably a real structure to it, maybe a framework of some sort that a parish can follow, and really plan so that changes can be seen or monitored if they're happening, and particularly on how decisions are made. Very often the parish pastoral council can make the decision. It can be a top-down approach, whereas when we had the spiritual conversation, decisions were arrived at as a group rather than as one or two outspoken individuals, kind of ruling the conversation. But definitely plans need to be made, strategies to be followed, to be put in place and followed. Okay. And that's what
We're just running very short on time, Susan. Do any of you others want to make a comment about on answering that question? What you see is what the critical issues or factors are that to make synodality happen in your place, your region?
I was just going to make mention of the fact that I think we've done a very bad job of forming people, or actually developing a theology around what is synodality. And I think we need to really be able to articulate that clearly. It's, as Susan said, it's not a new concept, but I don't think we've been socializing the theology around synodality and how important it is actually to the foundation of our Christian communities. It's not new. And I think with that, we could actually then be identifying where in our communities and local churches we have been practicing synodality. You probably just haven't given it that name, and probably what the revolutionary thing I think of it is really identifying the co-responsibility and the equal responsibility of all being participating in it, and inviting all to be participants in it. And we were talking at the Synod about the difference between you can welcome everyone in, but do people belong? And there is an understanding that definition of being, yeah, come on in, but do you belong in the conversation? And how do we actually enable fruitful conversations of all that have been invited?
Right, very important point. Yeah. I'm going to ask now Dr. Alyssa Roper to draw our threads together. Dr. Alyssa has a PhD from Yarra Theological Union in Australia, and she specialises in synodality in the Catholic Church. She's had a lot of experience in speaking to conferences and speaking in webinars and so on this. So hopefully you've been listening with very keen ears. I'm sure you have been, Alyssa, and you might better just draw these threads together for us and your conclusions and where this is taking us from here.
Thank you, Christina. Thank you. And also, Wominjika, welcome in the language of the Wurundjeri people, the traditional owners and carers of the land and the waters where I live. What a wonderful group of speakers. I've really enjoyed listening to them, and it's been a wonderful task to listen to the key threads and draw them together, which is a very easy task, actually. I'm going to highlight some, perhaps some keywords that might describe the experience of synodality in each region. But first I want to point to the documents that were submitted by each conference of bishops. So I belong in the conference of the Australian bishops, and then we've got PNG and SI and so on. And the key themes that were really drawn out by each conference, which means it's come through all of the people and the consultations. Have a listen to these words and how you've heard them from each of the speakers tonight. Mission, formation and resourcing, evangelisation, co-responsibility, and also the environment and climate change, which we didn't dwell on much, but you could see it's very much a part of our CPAC siblings there on in the islands. So when I listened to the commentary on the Pope's visit, so the Pope's travelled along to the north of Australia, along various countries there, and a word that jumped out at me was the word peripheries. So many of the headlines about the Pope's visit to our area of the world was the word periphery. And I thought, what does that mean? And what conclusions are people drawing about us, whether we're in Papua New Guinea or across to Vietnam or Timor-Leste and so on? What images does that draw out? So keeping that in mind, I'm going to first touch on Kelly Paget's presentation and our experience in Australia. And she did a great job of summarising that. And for me, my observation has been for a number of years that we've really taken a formal path through synodality. And we've done the consultations, we've done the many documents. And as she said, there's a little bit of consultation fatigue. But we have become very familiar with the need to formalise the processes, to adapt our, and she used the word transformation, which is wonderful because that's the outcome that we're hoping for. And then, of course, the impact that Australia's experience has had on the synod itself is, you know, a wonderful sharing of what's happening in Australia with the global church. Now, the Papua New Guinea experience that Father Victor shared with us, wearing his lovely Manus headband, and he really showed the diversity of life in PNG with its 600 islands and over 700 languages, and likewise in the Solomons, the huge diversity of people, but also the huge devotion to Christianity. So for me, synodality in PNG-SI is a really lived experience. It resonates with their culture, and the enculturation of the gospel has really brought the gospel to life in that place. So some of Victor's points that stood out to me, he said, the church is our home. We are looking towards the poor and the marginalised and extending our tent. We look at the laity and their role in the church and their contributions, and likewise for the role of women. He said the church has helped transform women's places in the wider culture in Papua New Guinea. So the enculturation of the gospel then works to transform the culture in which it's living. He says the church is alive, and in his own words, he said synodality is our lived experience, an experience of dialogue, decision-making, and consensus. So clearly the theology and the words that we use to describe synodality is very much resonating with the people of PNG. And I love that he said, we are very happy to live synodality. Manuel Beazley from the Auckland Diocese, with that beautiful background of the location of the first Mass. The word I used for that experience that he described was attentive, because he kept demonstrating how attentive he is personally, clearly, but also that process that they're trying to develop within the church and the parishes there. And he used the phrase quality of attention. And I thought that was very beautiful as a way to understand other people, to listen to what hurts and frustrations and hopes are present in the people around us. He talked very openly about various challenges. He just mentioned the challenge of hypocrisy, certainly from the outside looking in, that is a real struggle for the Catholic Church. And he described the synodal processes as a ministry of listening. And I think that's a challenge to us to expand how we see the word ministry, how we see ourselves and our roles and our responsibilities. Obviously, as the baptized, we'd like to think that all of us have a role in the ministry of listening. Therefore, what does that look like if I'm a bishop, if I'm a priest, if I'm a catechist? And Susan Sela from Fiji, the word for me for your area is energy. Obviously, energy and beauty and colour and the word reception, because that's quite a theological word, being open to the Spirit, and clearly the Spirit is hard at work and being really well received in your area. So some of the words I took down from your actions that you're doing, your talks to so many people. I had energy and formation and teaching, storytelling, sharing your experience, and empowerment of those people. You are empowering them as you are being with them and drawing them into your experience and likewise into their experience. So I thought animated by the Holy Spirit is very much the example that you shared with us. And so if I come back to my opening question, that it'll keep sticking in my mind, that use of the word periphery to describe Oceania. Well, the word periphery depends on where you stand, where your perspective is coming from. And as far as I'm concerned, and I think that many of us listening will certainly get this feeling that the church in Oceania is not on the periphery of synodality. And I think you're taking the heart of synodality, the heart of the experience and the recognition that it's alive amongst us, to Rome, to the second assembly that's about to begin. So that's really exciting. And I think that energy, that attentiveness, even those formal processes, the idea of transformation and how do we cooperate with the Spirit, and the lived experience that we have there in PNG, that is a gift to the global church. So I thank you all for being our very special delegates and contributors to share that with other people. And I wish you a safe journey and very rigorous conversations in the Spirit for your time in Rome. And I hope you make many friendships, and we share this great gift of the Spirit that we have in Oceania. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Alyssa. That's a tremendous drawing together of all of the threads. Not just the descriptions of who we are as church in Oceania, as the people of God, but our hopes and dreams and our frustrations and the contradictions and aspirations as well. And so for those of you who are official delegates, but the rest of us praying with you and going along with you in hearts and minds, yes, it is part of the journey. And thank you all for this experience and for your contributions this evening, for this wonderful gathering that we've had. My own perception is that that perhaps in a way this isn't Vatican III or anything that's sort of radically different that's going to turn the world on its head, although we do want some radical changes, but it's actually Vatican 2.2. It's a conclusion. it's the second half of what began 60 years ago, more than 60 years ago, and a completion of that. Not a completion; it's a continuing that journey of we the people are the church. So, on behalf of everyone here today, thank you all of our panelists and all of you who have contributed. For your participants who are also listening in and those who are yet to listen to this, take with us the messages, listen to the Spirit, where the Spirit is leading you in your place, wherever you are, in your part of the world, right down at your grassroots community, parish level, community level, families, wherever, and be a part of this becoming a synodal church. Please look for an email from Garratt Publishing in the next week or so with a link to tonight's recording. And again, feel free to spread this video link with your community so that they may benefit from the wisdom that was so kindly been shared by these wonderful people this evening. And thank you again for joining us this evening. I'll end this webinar. Good night to you all.